I had just moved to London, and being a bit lonely and wanting to get into the dating scene, I tried the whole OkCupid thing. It was all right. I honestly wasn't too active on it. I checked my account a few times a week and messaged some profiles of girls that I thought were pretty. 95% of the time, my messages would go unanswered. I guess it was mostly because many of my messages in retrospect were pretty uncreative and dry. One day I was messing around looking through various profiles when I saw an extremely attractive girl and decided I had to message her. In my opinion, she was a perfect 10, not just the fact that she was a gorgeous blonde. We liked a lot of the same music and movies as well, and I could actually send her a decent email because of all the things we had in common. I also need to reiterate that her pictures were smoking, which most likely definitely clouded my judgment. And I should also mention that I'm a former military and Afghan veteran, so nothing really scares me. Almost immediately after pressing send, she responded. We messaged each other through the OkCupid messenger service for about a week, and I got to learn a thought about her. She had an interesting name that is Iona, and she was from Belfast. She told me she had a daughter, which didn't really bother me, and had a very long, complicated story about how she grew up a Catholic in North Ireland during the Troubles and was orphaned at a young age. She seemed really driven and had such an amazing story. I had so many questions, and in all reality, a lot of respect for her, so it was really easy to keep talking to her. Within about another week, we started talking on the phone, and then sometimes on Skype. She'd never do an actual video chat, which at the time I didn't think was too weird, but she sent me pictures of her and her daughter, friends, etc. For the most part, this whole thing seemed legit. The stories she had were pretty detailed, and she was talking about stuff that I really didn't know a lot about, and honestly couldn't comprehend then. There were parts of the story that seemed to get kind of weird and didn't add up at first. She told me that she was a hairstylist at some swank place in central London. I don't really frequent Central a lot, so, okay, no biggie. I just met her online. I wasn't going to head into Central to stalk her at work. Then she said she owned a bar in Camden called the Lock Tavern, which I looked up on the internet and is a real place, and managed it on weekends. She had details about the bouncers and regulars. This didn't seem to make a lot of sense, but okay. I mean, I guess you could do both jobs and be a full-time mom. It seemed odd, but she seemed driven and she also seemed really hot. So who was I to judge? Again, I wasn't going to be super creeper and pop down there. I just took her word for it. She also said she lived in a really nice penthouse near Covent Garden, which, if anyone knows, the London real estate market didn't seem plausible for a hairdresser or barmat's wages. She explained this by saying that she had fallen into some money after the Troubles. It seemed kind of far-fetched, but again, without actually meeting her, who am I to judge? I started to notice some other weird things. She'd send me pictures, and in some of them certain tattoos were present, and in some they weren't. I figured she was just sending old pictures, but I remember that is what started to tip me off that things were fishy, to say the least. But again, there's really nothing wrong with sending old pictures, and I had no real reason not to believe the photos were Iona. They all seemed like the same girl, and with the exception of the tattoos and some small changes in hair color, nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. She would also send me pictures of her daughter, who she claimed was 14. Finally, after talking to her for a few weeks online, I asked her out on a date. I figured it was time I finally meet her. We're set to meet up on a Friday night, and on that Friday, she doesn't respond to a single text or call. I had nowhere to meet her. By around 9 p.m., she texts saying things got out of control at her pub, and she was really sorry, but she had to cancel. I was upset and should have bailed there, but I forgave her, and we agreed to set up another first meeting. Things from here really started to get weird. As I said, I was doing the online dating thing, and in this time, I'd met a few other girls. Another girl named B had asked me out. I went out with BA one night in an area of London called Shoreditch, which isn't too far from where Iona's pub was. While I was out, Iona called and texted me a few times. I basically just ignored the calls. When the date was over, I said bye to Bea and went home and called Iona. She asked where I was, and basically I lied. I said I was out with a friend. Iona didn't say anything, and we talked on the phone for a bit and then said goodnight. The situation got strange. A few nights later, when Iona caught me in my lie, she claimed that she knew that I was out with another girl. She knew which restaurant I was at, and the night that I had been there, she knew what Bia had looked like. Iona claimed that one of the bouncers from her pub knew what I looked like because she had shown him photos, and he recognized me when I came through the doors at the restaurant in Shoreditch. This didn't make a lot of sense because I didn't see any bouncers at the restaurant we were at, but maybe it was bartending or something I didn't know. She had details, and they were spot on. This was odd to say the least. I basically told Iona that the date was set up before I'd even met her, and we weren't really dating, so she had no right to be upset. Plus, she stood me up, that so if anyone should be mad, it's me. To be honest, I forget what really happened in this part of the story. I think we fought for a little bit, didn't talk for a few weeks. Then one night she called me really late. It seemed off, so I answered. She was panicking. From what I could tell, she was suffering from sleep paralysis, which I know was scary, so I stayed on the phone with her until she went back to sleep. This happened a few more times. I really had no intention to date or even see her. I went home to the US for about a month, and while we did keep limited contact, there was nothing too serious, and my expectations were pretty low. After I'd gotten back to London, she invited me out. I don't remember much of the details, but she ended up canceling on me again. I basically decided screw it. I wasn't even upset. We texted a little bit, but the communications really started to die down. I really didn't think much about it and went on with my life. Then one night I entered the Twilight Zone. One day I was in the King's Cross, St. Pancras area with a friend of mine from the States. He had to make a meeting nearby, so I was by myself in the area. That's when I got a text from Iona. She asked if I wanted to meet up, and I figured, hey, might as well finally meet this girl. I was in the same area of town 2 stops away and didn't see any harm in it. She told me to meet her up in Camden, and she'd be at the Weatherspoon pub at noon. It wasn't a date, at least in the romantic sense, which was good. And at this point, I was really curious as to who she was. I'd literally spent hours talking and texting this girl, so I don't know Camden that well, and I'm getting texts from her on the way up there as I'm trying to find the Weatherspoons. It's right by the lock in Camden. By the way, she's telling me she's at work and in the process of selling her share in the bar, but she's on her way. Another friend of hers is at the bar, but he's a great guy, you'll like him. Again, I was already right there. Might as well meet her friend. That's when I meet Rob. Rob was a tall, skinny ginger kid. He was about 21 and had a thick Irish accent. I walked up to him, shook his hand, and we got drinks. They seemed nice enough, and for as weird as the situation could potentially be, it wasn't all that uncomfortable. Another one of his friends was there as well. They seemed like 2 nerds in the early 20s. They talked about football and video games and all the other stuff 20-something-year-old kids talk about, mixed in with a little bit of politics and a couple random questions about how do you know Iona, etc. I've been in Afghanistan fighting the Taliban a few years prior. The situation wasn't anything to be concerned about. I thought to myself, then I got a text from Iona, something along the lines of, hey, getting tied up, be there in about an hour. Rob seemed nice enough, so we hung out, got a few beers, and moved on to the next pub. Still no Iona. Rob and his friend were nice. We did rounds, and fortunately I hold my beer pretty well. Another apologetic text from Iona rolls in. Screw it, we're drinking, I thought, and we're having a good time enough. Rob would ask me random questions about Iona, but I basically shrugged it off to being one of the only few things we had in common. We bar hopped around Camden and went to the Holly Arms. At one point I was in the queue to buy a round of drinks and felt like this guy was way too close to me. I turned around and saw an overweight old man with an ugly brown jacket and a pockmarked face. He had a crucifix tattoo on his neck. In all honesty, a typical barfly you'd see in a British pub. I said, excuse me, and walked past them. We continued to drink and blow the day away. By this time it was like 2:30 to 3, and Iona is nearing 3 hours late. I decided, screw it, let's go to the Lock Tavern, her bar. Rob and his friends seem cool with it. We get there and there's 2 Irish tricolors flying above the place, Yeah, you can tell Iona owns the place, huh? Rob said. The part of the story kind of added up. We went into her place, and I text her to tell her we're there. Oh, great, I'm almost done. I'll be down in a minute. She never comes down. But this is when the story gets really weird. This other dude named Peter shows up, shakes Rob's hand, and Rob says, "Oh, you're here to meet Iona." Keep in mind that Iona and Iona are almost identical names. I look at Rob, and he's like, this must seem weird. Iona is Iona's best friend. Now this seemed really weird, but I needed to figure out what was going on. These two girls have almost exactly the same name, and I had never heard Iona mentioned Iona before. I start talking to Peter, and Rob starts asking similar questions to him about Iona that he was asking me about Iona, but some of these questions were getting more serious. He was asking him things like, "Do you love her?" Peter's story then starts to sound eerily similar to mine. Peter meets Iona online. She's from North Ireland, has a daughter in his version. She's 12. He tried to meet up with her a few times, but it fell through. He was invited last minute to hang out. Oh, that's weird, is all I could think. Something wasn't right at this point. I knew that someone was getting played, probably me, and I was in some kind of game but needed to figure out exactly what was going on. Peter and I started to figure out things right about the same time and right in front of Rob, who stuck to his guns in the story remarkably well. They both have similar names. They both have daughters that are around the same age with a really common Irish name. I'm not buying it, neither is Peter. I decided that the pub we're in right now might not be friendly territory, and I don't want to get shanghaied in Camden, so I suggest we leave. Iona sends me a text saying she's almost on her way. Great. I said, meet us up the street at some other pub. Peter and I start walking out. On my way out, I ask the bartender, "Hey, is Iona working today?" He responds, "No, mate, Iona hasn't worked here in 3 years." At this point, I know something really creepy is going on. We head to the next pub. I've got a good buzz going, but I know I need to sober up and sober up fast. I think Peter might be a victim in this game too, but he might not be. He for sure can't be trusted. Rob and his buddy are suspected as well, but I don't have any proof yet, and my curiosity is keeping me there. We walk into another pub. Rob's friend says something to Rob, and I don't hear it, neither does Peter. Rob loses it. He yells at his friend, and his friend basically says, "Screw off, I'm out," and takes off. Peter and I are still trying to put things together. I find a table on an outdoor deck. It's quiet. I can think and I can piece this together. It's amazing how fast you can sober up when you think you're in trouble. I asked Peter if he has any pictures of Iona, and Peter pulls out his phone. He shows me a picture that I'd seen before. "Wait, that's Iona's daughter." "No, mate, that's Iona," Peter replies. This is making no sense. I've been sent the same picture of the same girl and been told it was Iona's 14-year-old daughter. I showed Peter pictures that I had of Iona. He claimed he'd never seen the girl in the photos before. Rob was sticking to the story that I had pictures of Iona, and Peter had pictures of Iona, and that he wasn't sure why. I thought the pic was Iona's daughter. He also kept claiming that Iona and Iona texted him, and they were on their way. That's when it dawned me. I simply looked at Peter and asked him, "What number do you have in your phone for Iona?" Peter reads the number on his phone, and it turns out being the exact same number I had for Iona in my phone. If all the other clues hadn't added up, this one sent it over the edge. It also sent Peter out of the bar, as he literally jumped over a table and ran out the door in a panic. It was actually quite the sight to see at this point. It was just me and Rob. I don't think that he had overheard that we both had the same number for someone that he was telling me were two separate girls. Rob said that Iona and Iona had texted him and that they're on their way. I don't know who Iona and Iona are at this point, or if they even exist. I basically tell Rob that I think he's playing some kind of messed up game, and that he's more than suspect of wrongdoing. He wasn't a big dude, and knew that if he stepped to me, it wasn't going to end well. I basically walked right through him, knocking him into a door frame, and tore out of the bar. I headed straight for the tube. I needed to jump on the Northern Line and get home. I wasn't waiting for anything. At this point, I had no idea what was going on. At best, I've been in some sort of weird Manti Tail type catfish scam. At worst, I was also a victim in a snuff movie. I get on the tube and there's a guy right behind me. I look at him, he's overweight, pockmarked face, brown jacket, we make eye contact. I look at his neck, and there's the crucifix tattoo. It was the same guy from the Holly Arms. I'm a bit worried, but I've been under worse pressure before in my life. I calmly sat down on the train. The train was being held in Camden for some reason and wasn't moving. That's when who jumps on the same carriage as the two of us? It's Rob. I could have sworn he made eye contact and gave a nod to the man in the brown jacket. At this point, I played dumb that they were there. On the London Tube, there's a certain dinging noise that's made right before the doors close. I waited to hear that noise, then bolted out of the door. I ran around and doubled back on the tube several times when I finally got back near home. I texted a friend in New Cross and told her I was scared and I was being followed. She was having a party that night and invited me over. I really didn't want to head home alone. At this point, I think I doubled back and switched lines enough that if Rob and the man in the brown coat were following me, I'd lost them. I made it to New Cross safe and sound. I had a few calls from Iona the next few days, but I never wanted to answer them. She also sent a few texts saying we needed to talk. Eventually, she stopped calling and texting altogether. I have a few theories on the whole situation. One of my friends thinks that Rob and Iona are the same person. I wouldn't rule it out, but the person I talked to on the phone definitely sounded like a woman. To those of you who are dating online and meeting sketchy people, be safe about it. Never let your curiosity get to you like it did me.